everyone, welcome to my first Quilty Tube video. I haven't made one of these before and I've been gently prompted to and inspired to do so by Miss Olivia B. So I have enjoyed watching the few Quilty Tube videos that I have seen. So I thought it's about time I jumped on. Over the years I have shown quilts and talked about them in my cross stitch videos, but never done a dedicated quilting video, so I thought it was about time. I would like to apologise for my last stitching video. The quality of the volume was quite bad, and I realise when I speak at times I may dip down in volume, so I'm going to very consciously try to speak clearly today and enunciate loudly enough that you can hear me. So if I appear to be shouting, I hope that's not what's happening. I hope it's just a clear enunciation and there is no dropping off in sound. I have an empty house right now, but that does not mean this whole video is not going to have people walking through it. So as people come home, just be aware. There could be some noise soon. So where to start on my Quilty Tube? A little bit of quilting history for you. I started quilting in 1995 or 96, one of those, and I fell in love with it instantly. Now this was an era pre-internet, pre any social media or any sort, of course. So if you wanted to learn to quilt, you went to a quilt store. And if you didn't go to a quilt store and you didn't have one near you, you hired a book from the library or you brought a book from the bookstore or went to a craft show and did a little craft class there. But very limited resources and a limited ability to gather information about quilting. So I would just like to preface this video by saying I am deathly jealous of everyone learning to quilt now or post-internet, because the variety of information that you have, but I also understand that the flip side of that would be overwhelming choices. Like, you must be overwhelmed by everything you're seeing. Modern quilting wasn't a thing. There was no such thing as modern style quilting. So it was traditional quilting. That's what you learned. There was no such thing as modern quilting. If it was on the landscape, it was more art quilts versus modern style quilting. So traditional quilting is something where everything's pieced together with perfect 1/4 inch seams and you're using traditional block styles and following patterns and things, and modern is quite more just sew things together, and then you might want a 10-inch square, so you cut what you've sewn together into a 10-inch square. You're not trying to piece something together to become a 10-inch square. So that's very layman terms. I'm sure people would have different definitions that they'd like to use, but I want to get straight into what I've got to show, because this is a dining room table and it is full. And my husband laughed when he left. He said, "Sure, you can fit anything else on that table." So I don't know how we're going to go for holding things up, but we'll do our best. So where to start? I'll just go in the order of what's sitting here. It's not in any sequential order of how I learnt. It's just it's sitting on the table. So the quilt I've got on my bed at the moment is a king size. We've got a king size bed. So this is a king size quilt that I wanted a scrappier look, but I wanted it to be tied together with the center hexagon of the flowers to all be black and white. That's a Florence Broadhurst material I picked up somewhere. It's the same one. So there's a number of black and white centers. They're not all that same. There's one that's more black than white. That's not the Florence Broadhurst. So you can see what I've done is English paper pieced these hexagons. Then I've stitched what's called a grandmother's flower, or grandmother's flower garden, maybe they call that. So that's all one piece with the one in the center. And then I have machine blanket stitched that onto the square at the back. So that square, look, I can't remember dimensions now. I can't remember. I think this is 12 blocks by 12 blocks. I think it's 144 blocks in this quilt. I don't know. It's a square. I designed this quilt myself. I'm not following a chart. I just knew what I wanted. I wanted English paper piecing. I wanted a combination of English paper piecing is hand sewing. So I didn't want to I wonder why. I didn't want to hand stitch a king size bed quilt. If you can picture that, that's a lifetime's worth of work, and quite frankly, I wanted to be able to do other things as well in my quilting life. So I thought through that process, and I wanted it to be a scrap buster. So all of these, I didn't have to buy anything for this king size quilt. I've used backing. I like a pieced backing, and the backing I used on my quilts, whatever I've got that I don't want to sit on the front of a quilt. So if I see fabric for sale for $10 a metre or $5 a metre or whatever, I will buy it, and that will get pieced together for backings. Some people use sheets, although sheets will be a bit thinner than quilting cotton that you can buy at the stores. Some people, you can now, I mean, when I started quilting, there was no such thing, but now there are wide backs. They've been around for a while now, probably well over maybe 2 decades now. Wide backs have been around. So you can buy something that's really quite wide, up to 3 meters wide, and you just place your quilt on top and then quilt through it. So there's no need to piece backs if you don't want to, but because I've got so much fabric, I just piece my backs roughly, just blocks of fabric. Anyway, so that's the one that sits on my bed now, and it is currently, I'm having another quilt that I'm making to replace this, but this is what currently sits on my bed. As you can imagine, it's a king size one. To hold this up is mission impossible, but I've just used different ones that I had here, and it's got a bit of a vintage feel to it because of the colorways, but it's just everything I had here thrown together. And the only thing I've aimed for is obviously not to have 2 red blocks together, because that wouldn't look very nice to have 2 red together. We've kept that kind of a thing separated. So that's quilt number 1 I'd like to show you. Quilt number 2 to show is something I did years ago. This was very popular. And I'm just having a total mind blank as to what they called this. Shaggy quilt? I don't think that's right. So this is a different style again. So what you did is you got your 3 layers. You got your backing layer, your back cloth. Cut out the wadding the same size and the top the same size. So you had 3 pieces, 1 fabric, 1 wadding, 1 fabric, all the same size, say a 5-inch square, whatever you wanted to do. Sewed them together, right side up, and then join them together with their seams out, which is completely opposite to what you do in a quilt. Right sides together, seams hidden inside. This is seams up. And then you go with your little scissors and you sew them all together, nick them every couple of inches or so, put it through the dryer with a tennis ball. Wish I could think of, I didn't know the name. I'm having a total mental blank, girls. I want to say shaggy squares or something. It's probably got different names in different countries. But anyway, it gives that effect. And it's just so easy. You just do a raw edge on it. Your seams are inch in. These were everywhere at the time, and quite often done with a flannel. I don't work with flannel. Flannels, we live in a semi-tropical climate, and I just find flannel too hot. It makes me itchy in sheets and stuff, but I don't. I've got some flannel here that I've picked up or won in competitions or whatever, so I will probably use that in baby quilts because it's pastel-y coloured. But yeah, that's that one. That's a single bed quilt. That was for one of my girls, my youngest. And whatever one gets, the other one gets. So this was the eldest, and she had pinks, so more of a pastel-y. But exactly the same thing. These were on their beds when they went from their cot to their bed as a toddler. This is how old they are. These have, and you can imagine, there's a stain of some sort. These have been through the washing machine hundreds of times, right? And they're still together. I like to make things and use materials that I'm not scared to wash. There are obviously categories of quilts, art quilts or raw edge applique quilts. that are wall hangings that are made to hang on the wall and not go through a washing machine. So you can't always say I'm never going to make something I can't wash, because there will be instances with different techniques that you can't wash them. They're not going to go through the washing machine well. But a well-made quilt with good techniques and good knowledge will stand the test of time. I would like to have a little chat here as well about materials. If you buy cheap material from a big box store, whatever that is, wherever you live, whatever that is, I'm not going to mention names, you are getting an inferior quality product. That's it. Now that is fine for project bags, that's fine for wall hangings or whatever you want to do with it, and it's fine for quilts if you want, but it will start to fall apart. It's a guarantee. It's not going to last a long time. All of these were fabrics that I paid, proper money for. They're proper quilting fabrics from a quilting store, and these quilts have lasted forever. So it's negligible, the difference in price that you pay for material versus the fact a quilt that lasts 12 months or a quilt that lasts 20 years. I mean, work that out. That's a big difference. So the time and love that you put into a quilt, if you possibly can, support your quilt store and go and meet the lovely ladies that work there. No one works in a quilt store that doesn't love quilting. So if you are learning and you have any questions, I can't more strongly advocate for being part of a quilting community at a quilting store if you physically can, or geographically can, you're near one. Absolutely support your local quilt store. They'd be appreciative, but they will just pay you tenfold back in knowledge and support and advice, and you want to pop in with something that's not working and just their brain about some knowledge. You can't get that if you're just ordering online. So if you can support your local quilt store, I can't more strongly advocate for that. I did one beginner course. I actually, those quilts aren't here. I was pregnant when I signed up to do a quilting course, and I found out I'd signed up and we were waiting to get a start date on the course, because it was getting all these ladies' names together and finding out what the best date was for everyone. And when she rang back, I said, I'm actually just found out I'm pregnant. Can I make baby quilts instead? And she said yes, because it was for a single bed quilt, this beginner's class. You can make 2 cot-size quilts, big cot-size quilts. So I did that, but that was actually, I actually lost that child. So I had these 2 cot-size quilts that I had made as a beginner quilter. So that does peg it as 96. So 1996. So she was adaptable. I learned so much through that beginner's class. Then I went on and did another class in applique, which I will show you another time, because that sat behind me in my last video, stitching video. It's a lovely lead light looking one, and I forgot to bring that. But that was a beautiful class by a lovely lady who designed that quilt that she taught us. Ruth, I think her name was, from memory. So that store was a wealth of knowledge for me, and I was back and forth, and I learned so much, and I brought so much material from them, and a lot of it was timeless stuff that stood the test of time. Now, a funny little story, when I was learning to quilt, you had to go in, and the ladies obviously helped you choose that you need your materials, X amount of this, X amount of that. And I really didn't have I was 26 years old, I didn't really have any confidence with anything arty or colour. I just really wanted to learn to quilt. I'd seen How to Make an American Quilt with Winona Ryder in it, and I just knew I wanted to learn to quilt. I wanted to before, because I'd gotten into cross stitching, but I just knew I wanted to, and I had no idea what to do. And I had chosen plain yellow, plain red, plain blue, all very primary colours, very kindergarten primary colours, and there was no patterns in there. And she just very gently guided me and said, yes, I know you're making a child's quilt, but a very simple and easy to remember tip is choose one fabric. And I still use this to this day. It's so handy. Choose one fabric that you fall in love with. One fabric. It doesn't matter. Just one. This is the starting point if you're unsure of yourself. Choose one fabric that you fall in love with, and from that fabric, pull out the colours. So the colours you pull out, you don't have to pull out this darker pink and have a plain dark pink. You could have that dark pink with stripes, with polka dots, with other flowers. So just start with the one fabric that you like that's patterned. It doesn't matter if it's large print or small print, low volume or high volume, whatever. Just choose the fabric that sings to you, that you love, that you just go, oh, and your heart's just taken away. And from that, pull other colours. So that's a very easy way to get a palette of colours together for a quilt with really no knowledge. And if you've just got fear in your heart and you're thinking, oh my God, how I choose colours, I'm really stressing about this, choose one patterned fabric and from there pull the colours in that, because that fabric designer has done all that work for you. They're very knowledgeable, they're very clever, they've done that for you. Choose some colours from there. Okay, so pre-cuts now. Obviously the world of pre-cuts wasn't around when I started quilting. There was no pre-cuts. Pre-cuts weren't a thing. It didn't exist. There weren't jelly rolls, there weren't 5-inch charm squares, there weren't layer cakes, there weren't for fat quarter bundles. You could buy fat quarters, but they didn't sell them in bundles. Fat quarters were something that the store cut for you and sometimes put together. They weren't released like that by the designer. So the world has changed, and for the better, I tell you. So just showing you a little bit of the stash that I've got. This was something I picked up when I was in Missouri Star Quilt Co. when Ali went on her great big adventure in 2018, and I visited the Mecca of quilting, and I picked up this butter churn basics. It's basically all cream coloured jelly roll. I still haven't cracked it 3 years on, and this is me buying stuff and then it's too good to cut into, but that is the way of most quilters, so I don't feel bad about that. This is a cotton and steel, beautiful greens. And how do I choose? When you're looking at thousands of things to choose from, with I don't know how many quilting stores are there, 10 or 12 quilting stores in the one town. Just go for what calls to you. You can't do anything but. I couldn't have gone there going, well, I could have. I want to make a quilt that's this and that, that's got this and that. And I didn't. I just went with my heart and the things that called to me, and I brought things that I knew would suit my house, that I would love going forward. These are little charm square packs. They are a good way. The designer will release a range of fabrics and you'll get to sample all of them. And this is a quick, easy way to put a quilt together, but if you just use one charm pack, it's not going to be that big. You could flesh it out with some sashing and things, with a cream or whatever in this case. That's quite a nice one. But anyway, so I just brought, this is more modern. I don't have a lot of quilts of this kind of thing, but always thinking forwards. I've owned this one forever and not touched it. Thinking forward to quilts for babies and gifts and things. So this charm packs are a really great starting point for starter. Here's some flannel. I brought that in America too. I would have been thinking about a throw for the lounge for winter, because these are colours that suit my house. And I brought some beautiful fat quarter bundles. This is a Robert Kaufman Sewing with Singer, it's called, and it's got all vintage sewing. I don't want to rip this open. Vintage sewing machines and things. That's going to make a beautiful quilt of some sort in reds, blacks, whites, and golds, creams. Don't know what I'm going to do that at some point. I will keep you posted. And this has got a similar kind of colorway, primitive gatherings. Needle and thread gatherings maybe. And this is all sewing, little notions and scissors and bobbins and cute little. My luggage was so heavy when I came back from there, it was ridiculous. Well, see that basket there? That normally has a quilt in it behind my shoulder there. I'll tell you which it is when we get there. Okay. And these ones here, that's the top one that I made with a It's not a jelly roll though. It's called something else. It comes from another company. Jelly roll is like a brand name from Moda. Moda is the company that releases the product, and they call these jelly rolls. But because that's their name for that cut, so other companies call them other things. But basically, a jelly roll is 2.5-inch strips, and that company, I can't think what it was, but it's got moose and fish and woodsy looking things, and it reminded me of Newfoundland when I visited Pammy. So I made that log cabin quilt to be a little reminder of my beautiful trip to Canada. And I used a red square in the center, which is traditionally what log cabin does, because it represents the fireplace. That's a brick fireplace behind me, by the way. So this quilt ladder is behind a brick open earth fireplace. So that's what the red traditional center of a log cabin stands for. Now this is a barbecue quilt that I made of tiny 2-inch squares that are cut into 1/2-inch triangles sewed together, and it's a long quilt that goes on my barbecue table for when we have barbecues out the back. And it's long and thin, and it's specifically designed to fit my barbecue table. And I kept making these blocks, and then it goes too wide, and then I need another set and another set. So it hangs along the strip, and it hangs down a little bit on either end. So when we have it's an 8-seater table, so when we have everyone out there, it's lovely. It just covers, and I love having plates of food on top of it, and it's beautiful. So that, as you can imagine, every time I use that quilt and pull it down there, it goes onto the barbecue table. It gets used for a function or a barbecue or a family gathering, and it gets washed because it's got tomato sauce on it or whatever. So that has been used and designed. I designed it using all my sort of warm colours, knowing it's going to go under food, knowing it's going to need to be washed a lot. They're 2-inch squares into 1/2 square triangles. It's perfect. It's not got a hole in it. It's not wearing, and it's again been washed hundreds of times. So back to my point, pay a little bit more. I'm going to enjoy that quilt my whole life, and all my quilts will go to my kids because they'll be able to go to my kids. Okay. Now this one is just Asian prints I picked up at a craft show, and I've just done like a 4-patch block and just sashing. It's very simple. It was just done to highlight like the Japanese fabrics that I brought at this craft show. That's a very simplistic quilt that I banged up literally in 2 days. So I've got different varying skills of quilts to show you here today. Some are very simplistic, some are a little bit harder, and some aren't even that hard. They're just long process of making because of the sheer size of them. So you can start off small. I'd probably suggest you do a little table runner or even a little mug rat. What did I just say? Mug mat. A little table placemat, something like that, a pillow, something that is small that you can gain some skills with and not feel scared that, you're going to waste what you've learnt, or you're scared it's too big, it's a quilt, and you feel intimidated. I'd probably say start off with something like a little bit smaller and go from there. Now this was one I made before I made my current bed quilt for my daughter. I made this to fit a single bed, and I kid you not, within a year, she said, "Oh, Mum, I really want a double bed in my room." People, as you learn to quilt and as you go along and do your quilt journey, you're going to gather these stories, and every time you look at the quilt, you're just going to think, yep, that's the one I put on the bed, and she loved it, and she chose the colours. I do love this quilt. It's timeless. So she wanted pink, black, greys. This is an old vintage material from my mother-in-law from the 60s. And I think everything, and this one too. That's like a hibiscus. That's actually faded a bit. I've got a feeling that was like a dress material. But otherwise, all of these are just things that were in my stash. I love stash. I love stash for quilting and I love stash for cross stitch. Just thinking, having the inspiration and going. So I'm sort of, quite established this far in, 27, 28 years to the two hobbies that I sort of mainly focus on, that I can just do that. But that would be my suggestion to you. Just start accumulating things. So this is, again, I love log cabin. There's just something about that. That's a log cabin at the top. This is a log cabin as well. Now this is a different design called Quilt As You Go. So traditionally what you did is you made the top. So you pieced the top, whatever style, modern, whatever you want, you pieced the top together. That's the topper. You put wadding in the center. Wadding or batting, it's called in England. We call it wadding here. I think Americans call it wadding, but if you hear batting or wadding, it's the same thing. It's the middle layer. And there are lots, dozens and dozens of varieties. There used to be wool and there used to be a polyester blend, and now there's goodness knows how many different choices for that. So do your research. There's bamboo, there's breathe easy, there's this, there's that, there's lighter, heavier wool. The sky's the limit for what you can get with that. So do some research on that. But here is a quilt as you go. So what you do is you start out with your block of wadding, a little bit bigger than it's going to be. Give yourself a couple of inches either side, and you sew down the starting piece, which in this case was my center here, whatever this is. I want to say 3 inches, so maybe it started out 3.5 inches. I can't remember now, guys. I'm not going to remember. You get the general gist of what I'm saying. So I just sewed that down, right? And then the next one that you start would be this one. So that was right sides together. You put a 1/4 inch seam, and then you iron it back, and then you sew it down. So it's called Quilt As You Go. I've got a book on that. I haven't got it here. I've got a stack of books to show you as well. And then so that creates that line, and then the next one piece you put on is here. Now the beauty of this, I didn't pre-cut all of these pieces. I didn't say, okay, I need 20 of these that are 3.5 inch by whatever. No. When you're doing your log cabin, same as I did here, I had them all the same size. That was 2.5. This might have been 3 inch. So 3 inch strips, that's it. Cut your first square, that needs to be square. Cut that square. And your second one needs to be square. Or actually a little bit more because you want the pieces to go over it. But then from there, you're just butting that up, folding it back, ironing it down, and they're folding back on each other. Now, Quilt As You Go, please look that up. That's another good way if you are scared of using your sewing machine to actually quilt. So this is piecing when you're putting the top together, but the quilting is sewing through the 3 layers. And it is intimidating to some. It is a practiced skill, and I will say you need a walking foot. You cannot do it on a machine without a walking foot. A walking foot sits on top of the fabric and allows the movement like that. So a sewing machine's not made to handle 3 layers, one of them being thick, which is the wadding in the middle. So if you don't have a walking foot, your sewing machine's not going to walk over the top of the fabric. It's going to pull at it, and you're going to get jerky movements. You're not going to get a nice stitched line without a walking foot. So with this, you use a walking foot and just a normal foot. But when you do stippling, which I'll show you on summer quilts coming up, you use still the walking foot, but you change the head to a darning foot. So you have a little open-toed darning foot, and that's where you do the stippling and you can move the thing around. But this is just straight stitching. It's Quilt As You Go. I highly recommend you looking up Quilt As You Go. Anytime I show it in progress. You can go back through my Instagram feed. Go back years. I made this maybe 3 years ago. You'd have to go back on my feed and have a look. But it's a beautiful technique, and it is easy, and it's a really, 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 really good way to use up your wadding scraps. Because when you make a quilt, you lay everything out. Your wadding out is obviously bigger than your topping and your backing, and you pin it all together, or spray based, whatever you do. I prefer to pin, and then you sew it. But when you cut around it, so your stage where you're going to put the binding on, you are left with strips of stuff left. You'll have strips. I had a big roll. I'm actually out now. I need to buy another roll of wadding, but I brought the big commercial roll of however many meters of wadding. So I just couldn't, and that lasted me 10 years or something. Lasted me a long time. So I think I'll get that again, and I just do it at home here and have a it's huge, like it's big, but it'll get used. So anyway, quilt as you go. Highly recommend that, and I quite like a scrappy binding. So you can see I've just merged the different fabrics that are in the quilt on the binding. So that's quilt as you go. Colours are chosen by my daughter, and that's what I tend to do with them because I want them to like what I've made for them. I'm not going to spend, I don't know how many hours it takes to make a quilt, 150, 150, whatever. It depends on the style, right? I've not actually ever written down this is a hobby. I'm not going to calculate. Same thing with cross stitch. I don't want to know. I'm not going to write down this is taking me X amount of hours. I mean, that's just depressing to me personally. So whatever you put into a quilt, I don't want that to be wasted because she thinks, oh, I don't like those colours. I mean, my girls are 17 and 18. They've well got their own minds, let me tell you. And they're not going to have something in their rooms that they don't like the colours of. They're just going to have them in their room. And you'd be heartbroken if you spent all that time making something. They're like, no, I don't want it. Okay, you should see the god-awful mess I'm making here. So this is the current one that I have in my daughter's room that had the pink one. And it's quite a modern design. And it is from a magazine. Here we are. Look at me being organised. I showed this on Insta when I started it. It was from this magazine, Simply Modern. It's a French publication, I should say. It was this design. Baker Street. Oh, look, I intended to be organised and wasn't. I put started and finished, and I didn't even fill that in. Anyway, that's it there. They've got it facing that way. On her bed, I've got it facing that way. So it's just like a brick style. Very, very simple quilt. Again, I said to her, what colours, darling? Because I'm just looking at this thinking, well, that's a modern look. That will suit her design aesthetic. She's got a bit of a 70s vibe, my daughter, but I wanted it to be the colours that she wanted. And she said orange, pinks, yellows, whites, purples. And I'm like, oh, okay. I go to my stash, no surprise. That was no problems to execute. I think that's the backing there. See the backing again? I'll just show you for reference. It's just still good quality fabric, but something that's been on sale that I've picked up. Not wanting to use it on the front of a quilt, but just using it. See on the backing, see how I just use whatever on the backing and piece it together? Anyway, that's the back. But the front, are these. And I'm just trying to think what I had to actually buy to flesh out the colours. That again is that vintage fabric from my, another vintage fabric from my mother-in-law used to be a seamstress. I'm sure I spoke about this on a video before I stopped filming. And she had a wardrobe of stuff when she gave up sewing. And she's in 80s now in her eyesight. I think she just doesn't have anything to do with sewing anymore. But she had a lot of what would have been really cool, because what she used to do is, I don't know if any of you've all got memories of sewing, and I didn't have this in my life, but she's told me a story. So she was the neighbourhood seamstress. So everyone in the street, they used to bring a pattern to her. They'd bring their material. This was before the likes of big mainstream department stores and things where you could buy, there was no Kmarts and things. If you wanted nice clothes all the time, you sewed them yourself, or there was a local seamstress. So she was the one sewing. She had her own 3 kids that she knit for and sewed for, but she'd sew for the neighbourhood ladies, and they'd pay her a bit of money for, it was just like a little side hustle for her when she worked full time, a very busy woman. So she had all this leftover fabric, which I grabbed the fabric pieces that I liked, but she had boxes and boxes of vintage patterns, but all these things have been cut up. And I thought to myself, oh, they're of no use. Now, this was years ago. I think I'd only just started quilting when I actually grabbed the fabric. So I threw all those patterns in the bin. She said, do you want them, Ali? You're the only person. I can't think of anyone else. I'm just going to chuck them if you don't want them. And I let her throw them out. I could have done so much with using them. I could junk journaled with them. I could have done so much with those patterns. Just the front packets, they had so many cool images. That's like the fish that got away. You know, we've all got that story when you're like, I really shouldn't have let that go. That's my little I shouldn't have let that go, the fish that got away story of vintage boxes of vintage patterns from the 60s and 70s. Anyway, moving on. I'm ready to release that into the world. That was fabric from her. But everything else I had in my stash. I've got a feeling I had to buy something to flesh it out, and I've got a feeling I might have had to buy that. I chose that. I took the fabrics that I had here, and I just matched up. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was that orange one. So anyway, there you go. I could pull from my stash orange, pinks, yellows, reds, and whites. Weirdly specific, but I just thought that was funny. So that's what you have when you have a stash. Anyway, here we go. If I die in an avalanche of quilts, if you see that in the news, you'll know what happened. Nearly finished with what I've shown you here. I've got more, but I've just grabbed things quickly. I've put this video together. I thought of this, as I do, 10 minutes before I started. So, here's one that I made. Oh, this was another class I did actually, so I must have done 3 classes in that store when I started. This is a log cabin. Now, this was done with foundation piecing. This is my introduction to foundation piecing, which is when you've got a piece of paper with a design on it, and you're following that design, stitching 1 down, flipping it, stitching number 2. Because it's very small and fine. I could have done this without foundation piecing, but I was only new. I'd only been quilting for a year or something. But this quilt exemplifies why I wanted to show it to you. Ali getting a little bit of a colour finessing of her knowledge base kind of thing. Excuse me while I have a drink. And I loved this pansy fabric. I want to say I made this in about 96, 97. I love that pansy fabric. And from there, I pulled out these fabrics. So I've still got pieces of these and bits of this in my scrap tub. I don't think I've got any big piece. I might have a big piece of this ferny looking one. So there we go. And I've done the border sashing in that. I've done the center of the log cabin in that same matching one. And that's only a little. That's just a little one. I love that. It's cute. Okay. So this was another small one where I was teaching myself to do stippling before I got my good machine I've got now. And I didn't really have the flow of it. It's a bit jerky, but I did want to experiment with using dark thread. This was just like a charm square pack or something from memory. Look at all the little and on the back here, because I want to show you mistakes too, so you understand I wasn't born quilting. See how something's going on with my bobbin? It shouldn't look like that. But I didn't know that when I was doing it. I was just having a good time on the front here. So my lesson to myself with this was, it looks fine on the front. I use this as a table runner now and then. No one knows that's on the back. I only know it. And it actually, this again, I use this on the table quite often when we have people over for dinner and things. And everyone always says, oh, that's a beautiful quilt. they don't care that this stitching looks a little jerky. Like, to me, now that I've done a lot of stippling, it does look a little bit jerky. But it was the very first one I'd ever done. I'd never done it. And I was so proud that I'd done it with this. And this was my machine before my fancy one I've got now. So I am, I've crossed over myself here. I don't care. I've just done stashing, so be proud of what you've done, your achievements, step by step, bit by bit, pattern by pattern, magazine by magazine that you read, book read. And another thing I'd like to mention is don't underestimate the value of having some books and magazines. Now, I love the internet and everything, Pinterest. Oh my goodness. Being able to Google 1930s reproduction English paper piecing quilts and being that deadly specific, and you have thousands of hits, that's incredible. I mean, that's an incredible resource, and not to be sort of scoffed at, but to sit down with a coffee and have a book and read a quilting magazine or a quilting book like it's a novel, just from front to back, and totally be absorbed in that world is a completely different experience. And as a reader, I value that very highly. They both are needed in my life, the internet and books, but if I was given one choice, it would be a book resource, because I prefer to read, reread, and look through it until I absolutely understand what that's telling me to do, particularly with some of these more complicated patterns, and the wording might be slightly different. I've got some French magazines here that are in English, but they do assume a certain level of knowledge, so I've got to sort of think about what was that they just said, and then think through that process, and maybe the wording's a little bit different. So I do like to do that with a book, so I can just sit there and reread, and then when I get it, I've got it, and I've got that resource there. I don't have to go backtracking through the internet to try and find what I've lost. So anyway, so that's my my very first stippling on something. Oh, and I did like sorry, that one I just showed you for my daughters. I literally am in danger of being falling over here. So I just did an overall kind of like a stippling, but like a loop, just a very loose, loopy thing. Purposely wanted it to go over the top of each other. Again, heavily quilted and it's soft. This is on a teenager's bed. This is going to need to go through the wash regularly, right? It's not going to, you can tie quilts. That's another point. I have tied some quilts that I gave away, little baby quilts, and they've got 6-inch squares, and I tied them just for the look. But the problem with tying is that they won't wash as well, because you've got a great chunk of wadding that's not quilted. So if it's not quilted, when it goes through the washing machine, you have got the danger of the wadding pulling away or bunching up or that kind of thing, and it's not going to launder as long term and as nicely as you would like it to. So that would just be something to keep in mind. If you tie a quilt, you want those squares or whatever you're doing to be tied quite, I wouldn't go more than 6 inches, because you will have that wadding cause you issues further down the line with the laundering. So this was just an all over loopy design, and I've done a variegated pink cotton. So I wanted it again to stand out, and so it gives another dimension. You've got that very modern sort of brickwork design that I showed you in the magazine, and on top of that's the loopy swirls. Oh dear. Okay. I've got 3 more to go. I'm going to take a video and I'm going to take a photo and put it up on Instagram of what my table looks like after this video. So again, here are something I had, I can tell it's a fabric line because they're all coordinating, and I've just chosen alternating sort of neutral kind of fabrics I had here, not all the same, but in neutral colorways. And this is like this is a throw size. It's a very simplistic, you sew all your rows together and then cut them down and then make whatever size square that's the same as this. Now this is a difference. This is when I wasn't confident with my quilting, so I used to just quilt down a 1/4 inch from the seam. So there's a thing called stitch in the ditch, which I don't really like because it's practically impossible to get stitch in the ditch exactly in the ditch, and it can look really uneven. And if it's on light coloured fabric too, stitch in the ditch can look really bad. So I liked going 1/4 inch out from where your seam was. But anyway, so that's just gone down in rows. That's easy to do. That's a really good beginner one. If you've got a walking foot, everyone can do that 1/4 inch out or 1/2 inch out. Just use your foot as a guide to how far out from that seam you want that quilting to be. Very, very simple quilt, very effective. Suits my house. It's just a throw. Okay. Second last. This was one that I made out of triangles. So I think I just used a ruler. Goodness, you know what? I can't even remember how I did the cutting on this because this was just all my greens and browns. This was on my bed before that Grandmother's Garden English paper pieced one. And this is a queen size quilt, and then we brought a king size bed, so I had to get a bigger quilt. And this is just a lovely one, and this is the one that sits in that basket, and the kids just pull it out, or hubby when he's cold in winter and put it over him now on the lounge. But as you can see, it's just colours that suit my house. I've just used whatever I've got. It was what people now refer to as scrap busting quilts. So it's a quilt that's not got all the new and wonderful designer's quilt fabric in it. It's just whatever fabric you've got, you've coordinated it. And I really love, this is the essence of quilting to me, to use scraps that you've got, coordinate it, still have artistic sort of. And I could have within this done like diamond, like had these two triangles could have been coordinated diamonds that were the same, and then had diamonds through this, but I just did random triangles. And what did I do for quilting? Oh, again, at that time I wasn't feeling completely confident with my stippling or anything, so I've just quilted down. I've just done lines down, and you can see how, yeah, when it washes it's a little bit loose there in the top corner because the quilting's so far apart. So the tighter that you do your quilting, the more when it launders, it'll launder better. And you can see this has been on our bed, and this must be 10 years old and really well laundered. I wash my bed quilts every couple of months or so, maybe every quarter, every season, maybe every season, say that. And this is the last one I want to show you. That is a quilt from a magazine. Let's see if I can quickly show you. This magazine, years ago when I was pregnant, there's the magazine. Did I not bring it? Okay, it doesn't matter. If I come across this, I'll show it another time. And this is called Broken Hexagons. Now, this is the one that's currently on my youngest daughter's bed. And it is well loved, let me tell you. I made this 20 years ago, I want to say. Let me show you. It's starting to do that. So I've got an authentic vintage quilt that is starting to gracefully age. So it's called Broken Hexagons, and this is actually a very clever design where you sew 2 strips together and then cut a triangle out, and it gets pieced together in strips. Let me see if I can hold this up. this way. So it gets pieced and your triangles are joined. You've got to have a big design wall, or I had this out on my floor and would have to pick it up. I think that's why this quilt took me so long to make, because I couldn't leave it out anywhere. I didn't have space. But it gets sewn together down in a rows together. So you've got to make sure, obviously, that these two match together. But that was called broken hexagons. And I love this pattern. I've got fluff in my mouth from all those layer cakes and stuff. I would definitely do this again. And actually, that fabric is the pansies again. So that was around the same time in '96 when I brought that green and red foundation piece log cabin one I just showed you. So I'm pretty sure they're from the same design house, fabric design. See those pansies? So I love this. I love this one. So well loved. Well loved. Okay, I'm just going to put that on the floor for now. A couple of more layer cakes. I don't think I showed you these layer cakes that I picked up when I was in Missouri Star Quilt Co. I'll do something about these, but these pre-cuts, I'm probably a little bit more nervous and hold on to pre-cuts a lot longer than I do like yardage. So I'm a little bit tight on cutting my pre-cuts up because you think, I don't know if I want to use that yet. Anyway, so another quilt that I made years ago for my sister was, this is residing down in Melbourne. So this is just a photo I have up. She sent me this blown up photo of this. So this is what's called a whole cloth quilt. Now she sleeps on a futon. That's why it looks like it's on the floor. It's not. It's a futon. She used to live in Japan. So I've brought this Japanese style fabric. The cat's scratching away at something. Japanese style fabric. And I've done these sort of like Dresden plates, but they're stars, just randomly around it. And the center is the same as this. That's not really the best photo. I will see if because that's all like a deep blue with silver. This was my sister's not girly. I had to really think about a style of quilt that would match her design style. She's quite minimalist, as you can see by this room. This is her bedroom. So she lives by herself. This is her bedroom in St Kilda. So I had to think about the style of quilt that would suit her, and that's what I tend to do. Like whoever I'm making a quilt for, I'm not just going to bang out a quilt that suits me. I have to think about, is that something that they'd like? Because I want them to love it. I want them to want it in their room, because a quilt in a bedroom is a design element. It's a massive part. As you can see here, you walk into that room and wow, it's the quilt. So every room you walk into that you've got a homemade quilt on the bed, that's the thing that jumps out at you. And so I want that to be something that the person who's got it, they love it, they love the colors, they love the design, and she loves this thing. So, and that's a king size. That was my first king size bed quilt. It's massive. Anyway. So at the moment, I am designing a quilt for our bed, and our beds are king size, as I said. So I am using these strips of fabric, and I am doing diamonds because I want to do like a Lone Star. I've shown these on Insta. So these are all diamonds that I've English paper pieced. I've used the gluing method, which I've not done before. So I'll just show you. This was brand new to me. I had to cut every piece of card. I put a hole in it, so when you go to pull these out, you've got a leverage point to put your little pencil or your quick unpick or something just to easily pull out that cardboard. So that's a little tip for English paper piecing. Put a punched hole in it. These are just glued down. So these get sewn together, row by row. making diamonds. Then I'm gonna, oh, actually that's the dog. The dog's got a cone on its head because it's had an operation, and the cone comes off in about 2 hours time at the vet's. So these are all going to go together. Again, a scrappy random look, that's what I wanted. Go together in a star shape around. I'm really doing a woeful job of showing that. That's number 4 that I'm working on. And that's going to be the centerpiece. So I'll have maybe a circle in the center or something. So that's going to be the center medallion of this quilt with these 1930 repose fabric. And from there, I've looked out things that are in these colorways or would suit this. And I will do different borders around that and build that quilt out so it is the size of a king size quilt. So this is completely an Ali original. There is nothing from this that I might copy some borders if I get some inspiration for borders or designs of borders from magazines or things. I might do some applique in some of the borders. I might do some simple 9 square little blocks, or some borders might be small, some might be big. I'm just going to play it by ear, and I'm going to have a grand old time designing as I go. I have no timeline on this. It's not a present for anyone. It's just for our bed. The quilt on our bed is perfectly fine. It can be there for another 5 years if it needs to be. But I do love everything that you do. Just stretch a little bit further every time. Just do something a little different that you haven't done before. And that's how you incrementally build. The world of quilting is really well established, really well respected. And there are a lot of very artistic, intelligent women quilting that if you just entered this world, you could easily be, oh my goodness, and just be completely intimidated. And I suppose that's what I like about people who are learning, who maybe dive in and enter the modern world of quilting, which is a completely different mindset to traditional blocks and things. And it is made a lot easier for you to enter the world. So please, please investigate. I just started off when I started, so entered the traditional world of quilting because that's where I was with when I started. This is a reference book that has over 4,000 blocks. It's by the Queen of Quilting herself, Ginny Beyer. She's a quilt historian. She's very famous. She puts on exhibitions and things around the world. She collects antique quilts. What this lady doesn't know about quilting, it's not worth knowing, quite frankly. So this is a 4,000 block book. It's amazing. So I have all the knowledge and the graphs down the bottom to duplicate any of those I wanted. So again, reference tool, amazing. Now this Quilter's Companion is an Australian magazine that I collected for quite a number of years because it came with a DVD, and that DVD had a project by the designer, and that the instructions for that design was in the magazine attached to the DVD. So it was like a little mini class. Right, and beautifully done. The DVDs are filmed in a studio, so very, very easy to follow. You can visually see what the designer's doing, and she shares little hints and tips. And this was pre-YouTube. These DVDs were pre-YouTube, so what a boon for someone like me who just was busy at the time and thought, well, I can get these DVDs and do the class with the magazine. I haven't done any of them, but I've got a stack of DVDs, and I will one time. But I was just looking through these in the last few days. I've been looking through all my quilting magazines and getting excited about some of the patterns that I've got, because I have got patterns, people. I've got dozens and dozens of books. I've got probably about 40 or 50 quilting magazines. Each of those magazines probably has 10 patterns in it. So I've probably got, just across my magazines, upwards of, 500 patterns. So I don't need any more quilting patterns. But this is a clever idea. I really liked the idea of these, but this is just rickrack around the outside of the circle. So I looked that out and I thought, I'd like that. That's going to add a textural element. I'd like to give that a go. So I've been going through and I always, when I get a magazine in, or a book, I'll highlight it. And here's a tip from the old and weary. When you just put a little post-it note and you don't write on that post-it note what your thoughts are, Guess what might happen in 25 years' time when you come back to that post-it note? You guessed it. You have no idea what you were thinking. No, zero. You just can't think, what was it about that project that intrigued me, that I was excited about, that I wanted to do, that I thought was interesting? Zero memory recollection, particularly, and it's probably going to be worse for a lot of people now, if your brain takes in thousands of images on Pinterest, Facebook, Instagram, books, magazines, whatever, if you're taking that in all the time, right, something's got to fall out the other side. You're going to forget. So I made it my mission to always write, just even if it's a little ditty. If I've got quite the story, I'll use a bigger post-it note so that I remember what it was that made me think about that. So I've written on this one here, this would be beautiful, a big goal to aim for. Now, this is a book. I've got 2 of these by Michelle Hill. She's an Australian designer. She's extremely talented and she is obsessed with William Morris. And I'm talking, she is so clever. So she does with William Morris fabric, and I love William Morris. There's stories about him and his designs. And she has done quilts. A lot of them are applique quilts in the design of William Morris. So I've written here, would be a good goal to try that. And that's the whole quilt. Now, I love that, but I don't like those colours. They're not something that you can probably see by the background in my video here today. My colours in my house are warm colours. We have a country house. It's very earthy. We live in the bush. I don't really like these bright colours, but I love these applique shapes, and I can certainly see doing these in my colorways and loving the process and just going block by block on that. So I'm very glad that I highlighted that, so I will remember. And here, well, here's one in my colorways that I definitely would see myself doing, called Morning Glory. And I'll show you what that looks like. Isn't that stunning? Now that might look really scary to you, but if you learn to applique as a quilter, that's not scary. It's just the tools now. You can do needle turn applique or fusible webbing, which gives a raw edge. I have done needle turn, which I can show you on another thing I forgot to bring in, but it's time consuming. It's by hand, whereas raw edge applique you can do on your sewing machine with a blanket stitch. So it's quicker. So I would probably do raw edge applique on these. Gorgeous. So I'll quickly flick through some of the things I've got here to show you inspiration that I always have around me and I just love. Here's a tiny little wall hanging, another from the Michelle Hill William Morris collection. Isn't that gorgeous? And you wouldn't necessarily have to have William Morris fabric to do something like that. And obviously all of these books and magazines come with the little pullouts with the designs on them. And these are good for using. I've used some of these kinds of designs before and just done like running stitch embroidery on baby quilts for presents. I've used it like that. So that's something to keep in mind. What did I have in here? This is what I'm working on now. So this is by a wonderful designer in Tasmania who's currently active, called Hat Creek Quilts, Deidre. And she's very, very clever. She's designing all sorts of things. And I fell in love with this. This was in a French magazine, Quilt Mania. So I've started this recently. When I was in Kansas, I did buy wool applique, wool by Weeks Dye Works, fat eighths or fat quarters of wool. And I've been cutting into them to make these, and I've done these in cotton with William Morris fabric actually, and these, so the colourways I've chosen are a bit different, and I'll show you. I've showed these on Insta, so this is repeating if you have seen. So I've cut out my little bits and bobs. So you use fusible webbing. I've got them all numbered. And here are my stems and things. So they're all, so I've used the greens and reds, a little bit of blue, and that's all going to be in the center. I haven't used any pinks in this. I had a pink in the wool, but it was like a hot pink, and it completely took away because I wanted to use my William Morris fabrics here, and the hot pink just did not suit what I was trying to do. So these are some animals scratching, I know. Oh, it is the dog, not the cat. So these are the courthouse stair blocks. So as you can see here, these are courthouse stairs. So these are similar to a log cabin, but you go either side and build it out. But in that here, that's a log cabin. So I've got to do 4 log cabins for the corners. They're next. I just need to do 1 more of these courthouse stairs and I'm finished. But these are William Morris fabric. So I had to do 2 of each. These were fun. Now I've got 2 quilt whips at the moment, and I don't normally do that. I normally have 1 quilt whips. I'm very different with quilting and cross stitch. Cross stitch I've got, I don't know, 70 something, but quilting I have 1 quilt whip. But I'm being influenced by you, Mob, and I think that's going to grow. Okay. So that quilt will go together. This is a beautiful chart. It's called Lyndhurst. It's easy to follow. It's well written. I love it. I love the look of that. It's going to be a wall hanging that's going to hang up in this room. I'm really excited to have that up on the wall. I'll put a rod pocket in it and have it hanging off a rod, like a finial either side of it. So it's going to be like a centerpiece. I can't wait to get this up on the wall. And these colours, as you can see, suit my house. So I've taken that. I've not literally looked at that and gone, I can't do that. Those colours don't suit. Please feel comfortable to change what you see and make it yours. That's the fun of quilting. Okay, another style of quilting is crazy patchwork, which I brought this book. I didn't write in it, but 25 years ago, must be at least. And crazy patchwork is this, where you do all different shapes underneath. It's random. You bring in lace. You can bring in textural elements. You can bring in hand stitching along the edges, and I really love the idea of some of this on some pillows, and I love the idea of doing a handbag for like a glamorous night bag for that kind of thing. So this is something I've not investigated, but I have all the materials I could do that. And I've got a beautiful book by the queen of crazy patchwork, Judith Baker Montana. If you're aware of her work, you'll it's very, very textural. It's very rich, and I love it. And that's another rabbit hole, again, within quilting that I will dive down. Another one that I've not really investigated, but of course Ali brought a book on it because she rolls that way. 12 by 12. This is a bunch of Australian artists who have been giving themes within this book, and then each of them do a little art quilt. It might be a postcard size piece, or it might be a bigger piece. I'll show you one, for example. They'll give in the theme of water, and they are the 12 different artists and their work and interpretation of the word water. And you've got drawing on quilts, and you've got dyes, and you've got clever use of colour and texture, and very modern. And I love this because it gets that side of my brain working where I'm not, as I said to you, I don't draw, I don't feel confident with that stuff, but I feel confident playing with some of that. This is one were given the word shelter, and they had to work from that. Look at that. Isn't that stunning? That's like a mountainscape done with fabric. Get into quilting, people, and the different facets of it, because it's a rich, rich world. It's really rich. This is a bag book, that magazine that I brought a long time ago for this pattern. Not necessarily that fabric, but I really liked the idea of a little quilted knapsack to take it to craft shows or going for a hike or something. I adore that. One day. It's called The Trindle Rucksack, and it's from this magazine. I have a bookcase. It's sat behind me in videos before of all of this stuff. I've got so many. This was another one that I was interested in, Japanese quilt blocks, and I brought some really lovely Japanese fabric for half price at the quilt store many months ago. And they have all the blocks in here. And then ideas of how to put them together. And obviously I've started something because I've put this onto card as a template. And again, I can't remember doing this. Leave it. I can't remember that. I can't remember anything about this, what I was thinking. I must have been going to do that because that's what that is. Cool. No recollection. So learn from me. Make notes, people. Make notes. Because you will. You will forget. I'm not old and incompetent. You will actually forget because we take in so much stuff. Shula Pink. She's been around for years now, but oh my God, so talented. So talented. Get on her YouTube channel. Get on all of her socials and just absorb. This woman has talent oozing out of every pore of her body. Incredible. And Angela Walters, Supremo Quilter. She does her quilting. And this is a quilt that I would love to tackle one day. It is the shape of a butterfly, and that is very specific piecing. Let me show you. It's called the iCat Moth. It is very, very specific. Where is the whole quilt? I would love the challenge of following something like that. Maybe when I retire. Wonderful. This Chula really gets me thinking about stuff and colour, and I know I'm singing to Converted. Everyone loves her fabric lines. I don't think I've got any of her fabric. She's incredibly talented. There's a couple of ladies, Kathy and Sarah, that owned Material Obsession and have gone their separate ways, but I love Kathy Dowdy's work. So I have a number of her books. She is an American girl with an Australian quilt store in Sydney, and she does beautiful things. And she's got this very busy style that pushes me because I want to try being really flamboyant and confident with colour like she is. She's incredible, Kathy. She does beautiful work. So I've got her books for inspiration, and I will most definitely be... I'm just trying to think if I've made something of hers already. It is beautiful. What did I have highlighted here? Oh yeah, that's Denise Smith fabric. Jump rope, I think. And broken down again, that's not a hard quilt. That's half square triangles, pinwheel shapes, and little tiny 9-patch squares in a double border. So, I've got many more here. I wonder, we're at hour 13. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, so I might stop because I've got many more magazines. But I just wanted to show you something. So I was doing those courthouse steps, and for that quilt that I just showed you, and I have some orphans. So these are things that won't square up. When you do quilting, if you know what just skip this part if you're not a beginner, really learn the meaning of the word scant quarter-inch, because if you don't, you're going to have compounding issues. If you have a millimetre over on every seam and you've got 6 seams in something, guess what? You're going to be 6 millimetres out at the end. And that may seem like nothing, but it's a compounding issue. So be very careful with your scant quarter-inch seams. These blocks, for whatever reason, just didn't square up right to be the right block size. I think it was 8.5 inches. So I have got 3 orphans here from that process. I will square these up to be a little bit less, and I'll use them for bag fronts or bag backs for project bags. So they're not going to be wasted, they'll be used. I'll make project bags out of them, but they just won't be in that lovely wall hanging that I'm going to hang on my wall, because I've somewhere made whoopsies and I didn't want to unpick them all and have a look at it, and it doesn't matter. So confidence, I suppose, in understanding that you are going to make mistakes. And even Ali, so many years in, you're never going to be a perfect quilter, and accept that things are going to happen. You can work around that. I can recycle these blocks, and when I make something from these, I will certainly show them and remind you of this. Anyway, I think that's probably where I'm going to end it today. I could talk all day about quilts, as I know many of you could as well. Thank you very much for joining me in my home today. I've got to actually have lunch and go back to work in about an hour, so I better hurry up and wrap it up here. Thank you for being part of my quilting video. I hope you found it beneficial. I hope you found it maybe slightly inspiring, maybe a little bit crazy, scary, maybe inspirational. I don't know. I just love seeing so many people that are quilting, that are into cross stitch or into cross stitch learning to quilt. I think they go together beautifully, and I think they're wonderful skills to have. I think next time I do a quilty tube, I will talk about the baby quilts that I've made, and I've got many of them being given away, but lots of them I've got photos of. So I might try and show photos of my things that I've made and given away if I've still got them. I'm very happy to do a quilty tube video, and I hope I can do many more to come, and always have something to share you in my quilting world, because it is inspirational to share your videos. I know it does that with cross stitch when I talk about what my goals are with that, and I get on and aim to have a finish to show you all movement forward on the projects that I'm working on. So over with my cross stitch world, I'm working on peacocks exclusively for a year. So that's something that if you're interested in, follow me on Instagram. I will be doing a video for cross stitch very soon, but just felt really motivated to do my quilty tube, my first quilty tube video after seeing Olivia B's beautiful video. Please go and see her. Celeste Creates is inspirational. She works with a lot of very bright colours, a lot of Laurie Holt style quilting, which is probably not exactly my colorways, but they're the beautiful quilts, big applique images and different things pieced in bright colors. Very, very, very popular. There's a lot of quilters, but definitely jump on Missouri Star Quilt Co.'s YouTube video if you want to learn to quilt. That's a nice one to start. And check out some of the Australian designers that I've mentioned here, Kathy Dowdy, Deidre from Hat Creek Quilts. There's many websites that you can go to and check out and learn stuff. So I thank you for watching, and I hope you're having a wonderful day, and we'll catch you in this space again very soon. Bye, friends.